Hello, welcome to the Psychology of Good and Evil. This is lecture 2, continuing. We're going to move on from religion to the role of honor in morality. First, what is honor? We will focus on two definitions from Richard Nisbet and Anthony Appier's research. One historically based definition from Nisbet, quoting Fisher, says that honor in the South meant a pride of manhood and masculine courage, physical strength, and warrior virtue. Nisbet considers this cluster of qualities as resulting from pressures on the ability for a group to sustain itself, to thrive and survive. On this account, honor cultures emerge from social, cultural, economic pressures on groups. These pressures increase defensiveness and aggressive violence, as we'll cover shortly. Nisbet is committed to understanding honor as tied to the practicalities of living, for men, for women, for families and tribes. In this view, anywhere in the world, when subsistence and survival is harder, honor should be more relevant to people's lives and morality. And when it's easier to thrive, honor should be less relevant. Differing from Nisbet's view, Anthony Appiah considers honor to shape identity. He writes, "Identity matters to honor. A code of honor shapes your options by fixing what they require a person of your identity to do. It determines a set of honor practices. An honor code allows you to share in the honor deriving from the achievements of others whose identity you share." Honor is not so much an emergent phenomenon from social, cultural, economic pressures, like Nisbet says. It's a person's framework for understanding what is the right thing to do and what is wrong. It enables identification with a group, since your commitment to honor codes enhances the honor of the group, and when the group is perceived as honorable, the honor flows to you. This identity-based account suggests that honor is not just relevant to groups facing extraordinary social, cultural, economic pressures. It binds people together, coordinates their behavior, and this makes groups strong. We'll look at some ways that the concept of honor has influenced morally relevant thinking and behavior. Nisbet's work focuses on honor and the normalization of violence enacted by primarily white men in the American South. Appiah's take, it's a different approach to the moral relevance and roots of honor in human experience more broadly, proposing that honor can lead to moral advancement just as much as it can support traditions and practices viewed as immoral. These two different perspectives ask us to think about this broader question. Are cultures based on honor moral? In an empirical sense, should we understand the concept of honor as increasing outcomes commonly considered moral or immoral? The psychologist team, Nisbet and Cohen, took on as a case study violence in the American South. Both Southerners and Northerners, and those outside the U.S. looking in, commonly observe a difference between Southerners and Northerners in propensity for violence. Nisbet and Cohen wanted to understand whether there really was a greater propensity for violence in the South compared to the North, and if so, why? Indeed, several kinds of violence, such as feuds, duels, lynchings, have been relatively more commonplace in the South compared to the North. Nisbet presents an explanation for this long-observed phenomenon that he hopes will rule out previous explanations that have been given. One of these previous explanations was temperature, because of associations between temperature, homicides, and other forms of violence, and some forms of injury. It's been proposed that hot temperatures might induce violence. Nisbet considers this a spurious correlation. Second, poverty has long been linked to violence, and the South is generally not as economically prosperous as the North. Poverty has been used to explain Southern violence, suggesting that greater violence should not be found among prosperous people in the South. Third, finally, the South and the North, of course, had historically opposing positions on slavery. Scholars have theorized that their historic use of slave labor caused white people in the South to view violence as more normal, more acceptable. Nisbet pursues a different explanation. Nisbet's explanation is that the South inherited a culture of honor. This culture of honor is derived from fundamentally challenging social, cultural, economic factors that required violence in order for the culture to exist. What were these social, cultural, economic factors that contributed to the emergence of an honor culture in the South? In the South, the major storyline roughly involves a flood of European settlers, including English, Scottish, German, Irish, and other immigrants, first settling near the Atlantic coastline and then moving farther inland. A sizable number of Scotch-Irish settled in the hill country regions where they established herding and hunting economies. The hilly land was often too steeply sloped and dry to farm, and it was a really difficult environment, so they built cabins pretty roughly, and in general, they were looked down upon by settlers with more resources and by European travelers. To paint a picture of the environment, their cabins were described as the product of a world of scarcity, a style of vernacular architecture created by deep and grinding poverty. They were similar to cabins that were made of the cheapest materials available back in Ireland, like turf and mud, and Scotland, including stone. In America, they used logs and clay. They lived more communally than people tend to now and experienced more violence in the form of defense against theft and as a result of their intrusion on the land of established Native American tribes. Because keeping livestock was more fitting for the rough landscape than farming, these immigrants tended to rely on herding economies. Herders were extremely vulnerable if raided and robbed. Their whole livelihood could be lost very quickly. So they stayed isolated and made very strong shows of aggression when intruded upon and defended themselves ferociously. Unlike farming communities, which needed to work together over many seasons, passive forms of aggression and the rule of law or contracts were not as effective.